The first warning shot was not a missile, nor a laser bolt, but a message, encoded in the deep band frequencies used by interstellar navies. It reached the human outpost on Epsilon Eridani 3 without fanfare, slipping to the automated defenses as if it belonged there. It was a declaration of war, written in the language of an enemy humanity had never met. Captain Elias Vance of the Terran Defense Fleet stood on the bridge of the TDS Aegis, his eyes scanning the translation as it scrolled across the hollow display. The words were precise, emotionless. Surrender your expansion. Cease your encroachment. The Dominion tolerates no rivals. Admiral Sato, his superior, had called it a bluff. They're posturing, she had said. No species launches a war over an uncolonized system. But Vance was not convinced. Something about the message felt absolute. It was not a negotiation. It was a decree. The Sci-Fi Dominion had ruled this sector of the galaxy for nearly 10,000 years. They were an empire built on the bones of civilizations that had challenged them, a species of cold efficiency and unshakable certainty in their dominance. To them, humanity was just another upstart race clawing at the edges of their domain. The problem was, humans had never been good at backing down. The first battle came swiftly, brutal in its efficiency. The Sci-Fi did not waste time with diplomacy or grand speeches. Their ships emerged from slipspace in perfect formation, surrounding the colony world of Epsilon Eridani 3 like a tightening noose. The colony had no real defenses, only a few orbital platforms and the TDS Aegis, one ship against an armada. Vance knew they could not win, but neither could they surrender. The Sci-Fi had given no terms beyond eradication. The battle lasted less than an hour. The Aegis fought with desperate fury, striking at the enemy's lead cruisers, dodging through waves of plasma fire. But it was a fight against inevitability. When the Sci-Fi finally landed on the planet, their soldiers did not march with the discipline of conquerors. They descended with the precision of exterminators. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They did what they had always done. By the time reinforcements arrived, Epsilon Eridani 3 was gone. Its surface turned to scorched rock and lifeless dust. The Aegis had managed to escape, barely, carrying with it the final transmission from the planet's surface, a single, piercing scream before the feed cut to static. The Terran Defense Fleet, once divided between expansionists and isolationists, now found unity in vengeance. War was declared within the hour. The Sci-Fi did not respond. They had already moved on to their next target. Years passed, and the war bled across the stars. Humanity adapted, as it always had, turning its weakness into strength. Against the Sci-Fi's overwhelming firepower, humans became ghosts in the dark. Hit-and-run tactics, guerrilla strikes, sabotage. Fleets were no longer bound by traditional formations. They moved in unpredictable swarms, AI-assisted strategies evolving mid-battle to counteract the Dominion's cold precision. And yet, no matter how many victories humanity seized, the war never ended. Elias Vance became a name whispered in both fear and reverence. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a symbol, the embodiment of a species that refused to be broken. There were others like him. Commanders, tacticians, spies, each carving their own legend into the fabric of war. But for every human victory, the Sci-Fi adapted. For every system reclaimed, another fell. The war became a cycle, an endless exchange of blood and fire. Planets turned to graveyards. Civilizations crumbled into dust. Entire generations were born beneath the shadow of conflict, never knowing a life without war. Peace was a word spoken only in wistful memories, a concept that felt as distant as the stars themselves. Yet even in war, there were moments of quiet. In the dim glow of the Aegis's bridge, Vance would sometimes stare out at the vastness of space and wonder if there had ever been another way. He had seen the faces of the enemy, Sci-Fi soldiers, their expressions blank, yet their eyes burning with the same grim determination he saw in his own crew. He had watched them die, and in their final moments, they looked no different from the humans they fought against. But the war did not care for such reflections. It was a tide that pulled everything with it, swallowing hope and history alike. There was no past, no future. Only the unrelenting present, the next battle, the next loss, the next desperate strike to keep humanity from vanishing into oblivion. The Sci-Fi had believed the war would be swift. They had been wrong. Humanity had never been the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most advanced. But it had always been the most relentless. And so the war raged on. The war should have ended long ago. By all logic, by all historical precedent, humanity should have been crushed beneath the Sci-Fi Dominion's unrelenting advance. Yet the war dragged on, slipping from decades into centuries, neither side willing to accept defeat. What began as a campaign of extermination had mutated into something more, something personal. Elias Vance stood on the bridge of the TDS Aegis, older now, his face carved by war and sleepless nights. His uniform bore no unnecessary insignia, no medals or marks of distinction, only the silent weight of experience. Across from him, Admiral Sato studied the latest reports with a quiet intensity, her sharp mind dissecting battle movements, supply lines, and the Dominion's shifting strategies. "They're adapting," she murmured. "Faster than before." Vance nodded. The Dominion had underestimated humanity once, believing brute force alone would suffice. But brute force had failed. Humanity had learned to fight in the void, to use the enemy's own strengths against them. Fleets no longer met in conventional battle. Instead, human strike teams slipped through the cracks of Sci-Fi defenses, cutting deep, vanishing before retaliation could come. AI-assisted tactics evolved faster than any organic strategist, predicting enemy movements with chilling accuracy. Yet it was not enough. For every victory, the Sci-Fi adapted. Their own algorithms countered human unpredictability. Their fleet formations became more erratic. Their ground forces trained to expect ambushes and asymmetrical tactics. Humanity had forced them to change, but change was not the same as breaking. The war remained locked in stalemate, an endless game of move and countermove. Then came the betrayal. The message arrived through encrypted channels, its origin deep within Sci-Fi-controlled space. It was impossible. No Dominion operative had ever defected, not in centuries of war. The Sci-Fi did not break ranks. They did not betray their own, yet the message was undeniable. Coordinates, a meeting point, a promise of information that could shift the tide. Vance did not trust it, but neither could he ignore it. Trust had long since become a luxury humanity could not afford. The rendezvous was set on an abandoned mining station orbiting a dead star, a place forgotten by both sides. The Aegis approached in silence, its hull coated in light-warping alloys that made it little more than a shadow against the void. Vance led the team himself. He would not send others into what could be a trap. The Sci-Fi stood alone in the station's cold, flickering light. Even without the armor, there was no mistaking him. Tall, angular, his species' bioluminescent veins casting a faint glow beneath his ashen skin. He did not flinch as Vance and his soldiers raised their weapons. "I am not your enemy," the Sci-Fi said, his voice measured precise. "Not anymore." Vance lowered his rifle but did not relax. "You have 2 minutes to convince me." The Sci-Fi's luminous eyes narrowed. "Then I will not waste time." He stepped forward, activating a small device that projected a stream of data into the air. Tactical reports, classified communications, and one crucial revelation, a weapon. The Cataclysm Drive, the Sci-Fi said. A final solution. A weapon your kind was never meant to know existed. Vance's blood ran cold. The Dominion had never needed such a thing before. Their fleets alone were enough to turn planets to dust, their armies capable of silencing entire worlds. Why create something even worse? The answer was simple. They were losing, not in the way humanity had dreamed of, not in battles or territory gained, but in something deeper, more insidious. The war had changed the Dominion. Their empire had existed for millennia without true challenge, their rule unshaken. But now, for the first time, they were uncertain. They had adapted to fight humanity, and in doing so, they had become something they did not recognize. Their leaders feared what they were becoming, and so they sought to end the war in the only way they knew how: total annihilation. The Cataclysm drive would not merely destroy planets. It would erase entire systems, burn the stars themselves, ensure that humanity's defiance would never be repeated. It was not a weapon of conquest. It was a weapon of finality. Vance turned to the Sci-Fi defector. Why tell us this? Why betray your own kind? The alien's gaze did not waver. Because they have already betrayed me. He spoke of schisms within the Dominion, voices of dissent growing louder, entire factions questioning the necessity of endless war. The Cataclysm drive was not merely a weapon against humanity. It was a message to their own people, a warning that the Dominion would not bend, even if it meant turning the galaxy into ash. Vance exchanged a glance with Sato. They did not need to speak to understand what had to be done. The war had always been about survival, but now it was about more than that. If the Dominion activated the Cataclysm drive, there would be nothing left to fight for. The mission was set in motion within the hour. A strike team, small and precise, would infiltrate the Dominion's most secure facility, the Forge world where the drive was being built. It was a suicide mission, but there had never been another kind. As the Aegis slipped back into the void, Vance knew the war had changed forever. For the first time, the Dominion was afraid, but fear made enemies desperate. The final battle was coming, whether humanity was ready or not. The infiltration was doomed before it began. Elias Vance knew this the moment the TDS Aegis emerged from slipspace at the edge of the Sci-Fi stronghold. The intelligence had been correct. There, nestled within the swirling maelstrom of a dying nebula, lay the Forge world of Varen Prime, a fortress moon wreathed in defensive platforms and patrolled by an armada of Dominion warships. At its core, hidden beneath layers of hardened alloy and energy shielding, the Cataclysm drive awaited activation. The mission had no margin for error. Vance's strike team, handpicked from the best humanity had left to offer, deployed under the cover of a manufactured solar flare, their stealth pods vanishing into the station's blind spots. No communications, no backup, only the cold void and the weight of the war pressing against them. They made it inside. That much, at least, went according to plan. The facility was vast, its corridors pulsing with energy from the colossal weapon being assembled in its depths. Dominion engineers moved with mechanical precision, their exoskeletal frames gliding between control terminals, oblivious of the ghosts in their midst. Vance led the way, his pulse steady, his mind locked onto the objective. But the Dominion was waiting. Alarms howled as automated turrets snapped to life, plasma rounds cutting through the air. The strike team scattered, taking cover behind thick support beams as enemy soldiers poured in from every direction. Vance dropped to one knee, returning fire, watching as two of his operatives were cut down before they could react. They had been compromised from the start. A voice crackled through the station's comms, deep and resonant with the authority of a warlord. Foolish. Vance recognized it instantly. High strategist KLR-YX, the Dominion's greatest tactician, the architect of humanity's most crushing defeats. You persist. Even now, at the brink of annihilation, you refuse to kneel. Vance ignored him, pressing forward, his team falling into formation as they carved a path through the enemy. The objective had not changed. Reach the core chamber, disable the drive, and, if necessary, destroy the entire facility. There would be no second attempt. The battle surged through the station, brutal and unrelenting. Hallways became killing fields, bodies, human and Sci-Fi alike, littering the floors. Each step forward cost them more. They were down to 4 when they reached the inner sanctum, its towering doors sealed behind layers of biometric encryption. Then came the voice again, colder this time. You think you have won something by coming here. The doors slid open. Vance expected resistance. Instead, they were met with silence. The chamber beyond was vast, a cathedral of machinery, every wall lined with conduits feeding power into the colossus at its center. The cataclysm drive loomed before them, a monolithic construct of polished obsidian metal, its core pulsing with restrained devastation. And standing before it, alone, was KLRYX. The Zyphar warlord regarded them with something almost resembling curiosity. He was taller than most of his kind, his bioluminescent veins flickering in slow, measured pulses. His weapons remained holstered. He had no need for them. Vance raised his rifle. "You're outnumbered," KLRYX exhaled, a sound less like breath and more like the shifting of tectonic plates. "No, I am the inevitable." The chamber trembled. Across the station, energy levels surged. The cataclysm drive was activating. Sato's voice erupted through Vance's earpiece, overridden with static. "They've accelerated the countdown. We're reading a system-wide spike. Vance, you need to shut it down now." KLRYX tilted his head. "You misunderstand. The drive was never meant to be a weapon of war. It is a correction." He gestured toward the machine, its core now a blinding sphere of compressed entropy. "This war is not sustainable. We are not who we once were. Humanity has forced change upon the Dominion, and the Dominion does not change. So we erase the board." Vance fired. KLRYX moved with impossible speed, his arm snapping upward, deflecting the plasma round with a pulse of kinetic energy. The next second, he was upon them, striking with inhuman precision. The first soldier fell instantly, spine shattered from a single blow. The second managed a shot before KLRYX crushed his throat with one hand. Vance lunged, his combat knife slicing upward, catching the Zyphar's arm, drawing dark ichor. KLRYX barely flinched. Their struggle was brief and brutal. Vance found himself on the ground, a searing pain ripping through his ribs as the warlord loomed over him. "I respect you," KLRYX said, and for the first time, Vance thought he heard something resembling regret in his voice. Then a single shot rang out. KLRYX staggered. Behind him, the last surviving member of the strike team stood, pistol raised, smoke still curling from the barrel. The warlord exhaled once more. Then he fell. Vance dragged himself to his feet, blood running down his side. The drive's core was still rising toward critical mass. There was no time. He moved to the control terminal, his fingers flying across alien interfaces, overriding safety protocols, searching. There, a single option, a failsafe. The drive could be diverted, its energy redirected, fired into the void instead of an inhabited system. A compromise. The war would not end, but it would not consume them all. Vance's hands hovered over the controls. The alternative was simple. Let it detonate. End the war in a single stroke. Take the Dominion with them. Ensure that humanity's defiance burned into the fabric of the galaxy itself. Sato's voice cut through the comms again. "Vance, what's happening? We need..." He made his choice. The chamber shuddered as the energy within the drive howled. Its power redirected outward, funneled through the facility's conduits and into the abyss of space. The Zyphar fleet scrambled, their formations fracturing as their own station turned against them, power surges cascading across their networks. The Aegis moved in, seizing the advantage, forcing the Dominion into retreat. Varen Prime was lost. The Cataclysm drive was gone. And yet, as Vance watched the Zyphar ships vanish into slipspace, he knew the war was far from over. The Dominion had been wounded, but they were not broken. Not yet. He turned away, his body aching, his mind heavier than ever. This war had never been about victory, only survival. And survival meant knowing that the fight was never truly finished. The silence of space was deceptive. In the vacuum between stars, there was no sound, no fury. Only the slow, unrelenting movement of fleets across the void, the endless dance of war. Elias Vance stood on the observation deck of the TDS Aegis, watching the wreckage of Varen Prime drift like the bones of some ancient, long-dead giant. The Cataclysm drive was gone, its threat erased, but the cost had been immeasurable. His team was gone. The mission had succeeded, and yet nothing had changed. Across the galaxy, the Dominion licked its wounds. Reports flooded in. Sci-Fi fleets withdrawing from key sectors, consolidating forces adapting, always adapting. The war had not ended. It had simply entered another phase, a new equilibrium of blood and attrition. Humanity had won a battle, perhaps even staved off extinction for another generation, but Vance could already see the next war taking shape beyond the horizon. Admiral Sato approached, her expression unreadable, hands clasped behind her back. She had fought in this war longer than most, outlived officers and soldiers who had once called her mentor. There was no triumph in her voice, only quiet certainty. "We intercepted a transmission from Dominion High Command," she said. "Encrypted, but our analysts cracked it." Vance turned from the viewport. "Let me guess. A new offensive?" Sato exhaled, shaking her head. "Not exactly. They're calling it the imperative mandate. The war is no longer about conquest. Not for them. They've acknowledged what we've known for decades. They can't exterminate us outright, but they won't accept peace." Vance frowned. He had expected as much. The Dominion was an empire that had never lost. To admit failure was anathema to their very nature. Sato continued, her voice quieter now. "They've changed their doctrine. No more planetary bombardments, no more full-scale invasions. Instead, they're shifting to a war of attrition, bleeding us, grinding us down, ensuring we never have the strength to challenge them again." Vance's jaw tightened. He had seen the signs. Smaller skirmishes, precision strikes, resources and supply chains targeted instead of cities. It was a war designed not to end, but to persist indefinitely, a slow, suffocating stranglehold. "They'll never stop," Sato said, "even if we fight for 1,000 years." Vance glanced at her, then back at the wreckage beyond. 1,000 years. Humanity had already spent centuries locked in this conflict, fighting, dying, adapting. Somewhere along the way, the war had become more than survival. It had become identity. The Dominion sought to break them, to wear them down until they surrendered to inevitability. But they didn't understand humanity, not truly. The Sci-Fi feared change, but humanity thrived on it. Every battle lost had taught them something new. Every world burned had become a lesson. The Dominion saw an endless war of attrition, but humanity saw something else, evolution. A message came through the comms, a transmission from one of the outer colonies. Another attack, another counterstrike. The war continued, as it always had. Vance closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of it settle. Then he turned, heading for the bridge. There was no end to this war, but there was always another fight.